Welcome to the Libido Lounge, where we focus on all things love, lust, and libido. We believe that fabulous sex is important to health as exercise and good food. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Lounge. I'm libido expert and your host, Dr. Diane Mueller. I am so excited to introduce you to Sarah Intelligator here today. She is a divorce attorney who has turned into a relationship expert. And what a cool combination to be talking to couples for so long about all the things that did not make their relationship work. I'm just so excited to have you with us today, Sarah. There's so many questions I have. I know I'm going to want to talk to you for a lot longer than the 15 minutes we have. And let's just orient everybody to you. Can you tell us a little bit about what was happening, what you were noticing, and being a divorce attorney, where all of a sudden you really got inspired to open the second business of working with couples and of helping support relationships?
Yeah, of course. So I have been a divorce attorney for close to 20 years, and I started observing patterns over and over and over in all of these marriages that have ended or coming to an end. And I started thinking that if I can get to people before they get to my office, if I can show them the reason that marriages fail and fall apart or relationships fall apart, then maybe I can prevent them from ever setting foot in my office. So I wrote a book. It's called Live, Laugh, Find True Love. And it kind of breaks these patterns down into 6 categories and teaches people what not to do by showing them the mistakes that others have made and repeatedly do make.
I love it. As a functional medicine doctor, everything I do in the world is about the root and prevention and all that. So I love that you're doing that from a relationship standpoint. And let's talk a little bit about your book. And I know you had mentioned that there's these bad F words, and I'm sure people want to know about what those are and what they mean beyond the 4-letter one.
Yeah, exactly. There's six F words here. And they're like the fail factors, the 6 F words. And so these are the reasons that all relationships, at least from my experience, fall apart, and what you need to watch out for when you're entering into your own relationship. So I'll just mention them. I won't go into detail into them at this point, but they're fundamental values, meaning people don't share fundamental values, fear, foundation, fixing, family, and fairy tale. And so those are the patterns.
So do you feel, because I think we probably won't have time to go into all of those today, and I know people can get your book to go into more detail, but do you feel like there's one or two of them that are like, oh, these are I wonder if one called foundational, is there one or two of them that are like, oh, this is we have to get this one so important. We have to get this one right.
Yes, absolutely. So although the F words are not really listed in any particular order in the book, because they're really all equally important, I do think that fundamental values is actually the most important and the one that you can't really progress into a relationship unless the partners share fundamental values. So I do list it first, and I do think it is the most important. And fundamental values, when I talk about them, they're distinguishable from things like fleeting interests, right? You might be 20 years old, you might love to travel the world, cast off all your worldly possessions, but is that necessarily where you see yourself when you're in your 40s or 50s? So that might not necessarily be a fundamental value so much as it is a fleeting interest. And you're looking for a partner who shares your fundamental values. And there are exercises in the book for how to define your own fundamental values so that you know, first of all and foremost, what your own fundamental values are. And then you are now on a journey to find a partner who shares those fundamental values with you.
So the question I think that other people might be wondering, that I'm definitely wondering, is what do you recommend then if somebody they discover, they do your work and oh my gosh, I know my fundamental values, and they're in a long relationship and their partner has very, very different fundamental values. Do you find that's a deal breaker? Is there a way to work with that?
I don't think it's a deal breaker per se. I think it depends how dissonant the fundamental values are. I think it depends how long the couple's been together, and what they've gone through, and maybe a lot of times people think they don't share fundamental values, but the fact that they've been together for so long means that they probably do beneath the surface. Like they're not actually defining what the true fundamental values are, right? But for the most part, I feel that in order to navigate life together in a similar way and achieve goals in a similar way and kind of want to live life in a similar way, we need to have those fundamental values. So yes, if you are in a relationship and you discover that your fundamental values are not aligned, it is something that you should definitely really consider, because it's not something that necessarily is as big of a problem when you're and just getting married, it's just the two of you. But if you decide to add children to the mix, as problems arise and things come up in life, I do think that it can lead to the breakdown of the relationship.
Yeah, I that's basically why I'm divorced. That's what I saw after 10 years of relationship, of finally analyzing that and being like, I mean, it's exactly the way I describe it to people around, like, it's not a problem with like him or I as people. It's that fundamentally our value system's different. So I really love that you're approaching it that way. And then in thinking about like dating, and when, people are setting up relationships, and let's say they read your book and they get their fundamental values really dialed, do you have advice on like, when in the relationship they should really start having these kind of questions and asking these things and learning that? Do you recommend that people actually ask this directly? What's your advice around that?
Yeah, so I call it, and it's kind of part and parcel of fundamental values, I call it the job interview. Dating is a job interview.
Yeah.
And there's actually an exercise in the book where you list your fundamental value, and then you're supposed to come up with a couple of questions to ascertain whether your date shares those fundamental values. And it doesn't mean that you're just sitting there with this exhaustive laundry list of questions on your first or second date, right? But it does mean that you kind of have in the back of your mind the questions that you want to ask, or the things you want to listen for as you do go on a first date, as you do go on a second date. So I think that the entire courtship process, from the very first date until you decide to commit to the relationship, is a job interview. You're determining whether this candidate gets the position for the absolutely most important job in the entire world, which is your life partner.
Yeah, I really love that. And I love that your book is breaking it down to that level. And also that it's like, I had an image for a second of, I think, a sitcom I saw a while ago, of like somebody like looking at their hand for the questions to ask. And that's not what we're saying here, right? It's just, It's really training people, like, especially with all of the matchmaking services, it's really training people, just like with being employers, like learning how to do a good job interview and finding the right people. It's really the same thing. It's like dating interview, right? You're teaching people how to go on dates well.
Yeah. And I mean, and I say it in the book, but it's like, you wouldn't hire a candidate for the job unless it's like a modeling job or an acting job. You wouldn't hire a candidate for a job because that person is good looking or so attractive, or we have so much in common, right? You would hire that candidate because the candidate is right for the position.
Yes. Yeah, it makes so much sense. And then is there anything else in, the six F's? Is there anything else in the six F's? Like, what would you say would be the next most important F if we were to stage them and categorize them to focus on?
I think fear is probably the next most significant, just because I find that fear is the number one reason relationships fail. People stay in relationships because they're afraid that they might not find someone better, or maybe you're getting older, your biological clock is ticking, this person is there, they'll do. Maybe there are certain insecurities that you have around the relationship or around yourself. And so I think fear is kind of, it keeps us from leaving a relationship, and we justify to ourselves why we should stay in the relationship, rather than listening to what I think is kind of the opposite of fear, which is our intellect, which is our reasonable, rational voice.
So how do you think, because I feel like that's a really challenging thing for people, especially when there's so many times when we're dating, we've already been hurt and we've already had, that the heartbreak, the repair, all the things that, especially if it's like divorce with children. And there can be so much natural fear of almost just like our bodies and our minds trying to protect us, right? To protect us from getting hurt. So, do you have any advice for people on like how to start discerning between what is like, what is like, okay, well, my intuition saying like this person's not right versus like, actually, that's just my fear because I don't want to get hurt again or in a relationship, like my intuition saying I need to leave, but I don't want to because of, the fear. Like, how do we really begin to tell which is which? Like, what advice do you give on that?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think we all have an intuition and we all hear what our intuition is saying. I kind of liken it to like Jiminy Cricket. Like Pinocchio hears what Jiminy Cricket is saying, but he ignores it and then he ends up in a cage, right? So we all hear what our intuition is telling us. We just shush it and sweep it under the rug because we don't want to deal with the inconvenient thing that happens next, which is that if we listen to our intuition, we have to end the relationship. So one of the things that I kind of talk about, just to put things in perspective, is I kind of approach it from a more like philosophical standpoint. Like fear is a fight or flight response. Fear is the thing that has protected us our whole lives. Like, right? We know not to jump into shark infested waters because our fear says, don't do that. You'll get eaten up alive, right? Or you'll get hurt. Don't touch a hot stove. You're going to get hurt, right? And that's an instantaneous in the moment to protect you in that moment. But fear doesn't really protect us long term, right? It's not looking out for what's going to happen to us 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Fear is really, it's a very short-term response. Our intelligence, our intellect, our intuition, that is looking to protect us long term. Right. And so if we think about fear and the hard thing is that because fear has kept us safe, we learn to trust it. But fear hasn't really kept you safe long term. It's kept you safe in the short term. And so if we think about this as a more long-term proposition, which obviously a committed relationship is, we have to think fear isn't my friend. Fear is just kind of this warm safety blanket that's keeping me protected in the instant moment, but it's not looking out for me long term. My intellect, my intelligence is. And it takes a lot of self-reflection, a lot of strength, a lot of bravery and courage to take a step back and say, yeah, I really want to be in this relationship. I don't want to go through a breakup. I am afraid of these things. But people should be a lot more afraid of divorce, and they should be a lot more afraid of, dividing assets and sharing custody of their children. And these aren't things they're thinking about when they're going on a first or second date, or they're in a, 5-month relationship or whatever. They're not thinking about sharing custody of their would-be children, but they should be.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I like that the distinction between short and long-term thinking. I think we just as humans, we do this so often in health with like all of our decisions, health and mental, emotional, and relational stuff. It's so easy to be like, even simple things like, oh, I'm going to have chocolate cake. And it's just one day. And then one day turns into 2. And the next thing we know, it's 5 and years go by. And then we have diabetes. Right. And so it's so easy sometimes to just see that short term without playing that long term out. And so I appreciate the strength in that too. Are you then guiding people with like certain questions to ask themselves as well to help distinguish, or like can you speak a little more granularly on like that distinction between, okay, well, long term, is this intuition, is this fear? Because I can also see, right, like long term, say we're in a long term relationship, or say we're starting a relationship, we see it's long term. There's also that part, I think, of humans where it's like, especially if we're excited for that person and excited to be married or committed, there can be like that excitement of like that desire can also almost overwhelm that intuition. Yes. So how do we distinguish also from like, oh my gosh, like this has got to be the person. I'm so excited. I want to be in a relationship, and ultimately choosing the wrong person. Is that where some of these other F's come in? Or can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So that kind of speaks to fairy tale a little bit, that we have this notion, this very romanticized notion of marriage and the wedding day and the proposal and all of these things that, social media obviously doesn't help that along. But that understanding that in a fairy tale, they get married and they live happily ever after, but we never delve into what the happily ever after really looks like. And there's this whole lifetime of the happily ever after. And I always think that a signpost of a good relationship isn't how you work, how things are when they're wonderful and good. It's how you work through obstacles and things when they're bad, and not necessarily bad between the two people, but like when life throws stuff your way, how do you work through it? And that kind of speaks a little bit to the F word foundation, which I break down into 5 pillars, which are honesty, trust, teamwork, respect, and communication. So that kind of falls within the ambit of teamwork, right? I talk about how infatuation is sort of like these like butterflies in your stomach, and how they take over everything. And that is not something that should be relied on. Like you're not in a place to make rational decisions until you've distinguished between that infatuation, those butterflies, and kind of reality, and you've really grounded yourself and you've settled down from that. But it is hard because our primary urges, right? Our primal urges are to procreate, right? It's like, that's one of our biggest urges in life. And so it comes as no surprise that we are infatuated when we meet someone new, like just the feelings, the hormones that are raging through our bodies, right? But we still always have our intelligence. Yeah. We still can, like, we're able to function in life, right? We still go to work. We still are able to get our responsibilities done. So we still have the ability to take a step back and say, oh, I'm so infatuated right now. Like I'm so obsessed. We've all had that feeling, but I am recognizing that it is that, and I'm not in a position to make decisions for the rest of my life. At this very moment, I'm having fun, which is great. Have fun. Dating should be fun. But like, just know that your intellect still is there.
Yeah, it's a really important distinction. And I want to go here to one thing that you said that I think it just comes up so, I think, frequently. And it's under one of your F's. I forget which F you said it was under, which is communication. Which F was that under?
Foundation.
Yeah. So are there any then foundational, we can play with that. Were there any foundational communication things that I do feel like, there's a lot of different techniques out there, like love language books talks about different things that are related to it, nonviolent communication, there's attachment theories. There's a lot of different things out there and models that really speak to how we innately communicate differently and how to really work with this. Are there any like foundational, like 1 or 2, like these are the things that have to be in place from a communication standpoint?
I think communication needs to be open, honest, transparent. But like the one example I love to give, and this is such a cliche, but like a woman puts on an outfit and she's in a heterosexual relationship, and she goes and she asks her boyfriend, she says, how do I look? What do you think of this dress? And he goes, oh, you look great. But he doesn't actually think she looks great. Like maybe he doesn't think that, right? Why is he saying that? 1, he's afraid to speak the truth because she might react. Maybe she has in the past. She's conditioned him to lie to her. Maybe he doesn't want to hurt her feelings, whatever it is, right? But what if he said, it's not the most flattering dress I've seen on you. I think I've seen you look better. It's not you, it's the dress. But like, I don't think it looks great on you. Right. And what if she got super angry at him and starts yelling at him and like, gives him the silent treatment or whatever she does. Right. Well, she's teaching him that in the future, he should be dishonest with her. He should not communicate openly and honestly. And if she asks the question, she should be seeking an honest answer, not just, fishing for a compliment. And so I think that there's a way that we communicate with each other that's a dance. Like we teach each other what is okay to say and what isn't. And when we negatively reinforce certain types of communication that is honest and transparent and open, we're causing a breakdown in communication in the relationship. And I think it happens so often. So I just urge people to make sure that when you're communicating, if you're afraid of your partner's reaction or response, maybe you're not in the right relationship. Communication needs to be open and honest respectful, transparent. There's a way of saying things that's respectful and way of saying things is disrespectful. But, but be honest.
Yeah, I appreciate so much of what you say there. It's reminding me also of like something I talk about in my work, which is don't fake orgasms, right? We're teaching partners. It's like a different version of the same thing. It's essentially teaching partners that we like what they're doing, and that's going to get more of that thing then. So it's just another example. And I really appreciate the questions component of this too, because I think so often we ask questions as humans and we don't actually want to know the truth. So it's like that whole concept of like, we ask a question and you want a good relationship, then you have to be open to whatever that answer is. And if you're not prepared for it, then maybe the answer is not asking the question. What would you comment on that?
Well, I think you should be able to ask the question, but I think you need to be prepared for the response. And again, I think that both partners need to be giving honest answers, but they need to be giving them in a respectful way. Like there's a way of saying, hey, that dress doesn't look that great on you. I've seen you look better, right? That's honest, that's respectful, versus like, ugh, you look so horrible. Right. You're saying the same thing.
Right.
But it's the way you're saying it. And the way that we say things to each other then breeds a reaction. And it sets into trajectory, a whole chain reaction of where the relationship is going to go and how these two people are going to interact with each other down the road, whether they are going to respect each other, whether they're going to start resenting each other. Right. And it's all centered around this communication.
Yeah, thank you. We've packed so much into these 20 minutes. It's so good. I think there's so many different layers and things to consider, and definitely set a good foundation. I want to make sure everybody knows how to get a hold of you, and the really unique, it's just pretty amazing, the background you have to be able to do this work that you're doing. I want to make sure people know how to get a hold of you, and we'll talk about that. But before we do, real fast, is there like one like final concluding, like if you could wrap all your years of a divorce attorney and relationship expert down into like a couple sentences of advice, is there anything you would distill it down to tell people?
Know your worth and don't settle.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's really perfect. Well, how can people get a hold of you?
So they can find me on Instagram at sarah.a.intelligator.esq. They can also find me at my website, which is lafamilylawpractice.com. And they can also get my book, which I'm dropping plates here. You can get my book, Live, Laugh, Find True Love, wherever books are sold. And hopefully you will never need me in the future.
And we'll have all of that in Sarah's show notes for you guys. And thank you so much for your time today. This has been wonderful. I love your book. I will get myself a copy. And thank you so much for the work you're doing and for being here with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, that concludes another episode of The Lounge, you guys. Thank you so much for being here. This is Dr. Diane signing off, reminding you to always stay sexy, always stay classy, and always remember to be a little badassy. See you next time. Thank you for listening to the Libido Lounge. Please don't keep me a secret. Please share this with your friends. You can find me on YouTube, on Instagram, as well as how to work with me at mylibido.com.